All right, I think we're started. It says we are, so good to go. So thanks for being here, everybody. I'm Andy Simpson, as usual. My compatriot and person I forced to do this with me, Andrew Hunter, is on stage left there. Andrew and I have worked together for a number of years. Andrew is a very well-known R&D chef. I do design work. We recently got together to start working on some projects together in a more serious way, and we call that Resolute. Um, Over the last, I don't know, 6 weeks ago, we started doing some videos to bring some smart people on. We realized that we had a list of a lot of smart people that we knew and thought it would be fun to just start having some conversations live with folks. So today we've got two guests. Herb Heiserman from Street Sense. Herb, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, thanks, Andy. Pleasure to be on. Time number two, and happy to join again. I'm one of the managing principals over at Street Sense, based out of Los Angeles here. We have offices in Los Angeles and in Washington, D.C., covering the coasts. And my primary focus for Street Sense is growing the experiential design around food and beverage and food and beverage offering. And we have a unique collective of designers that include everybody in creative brand space to architecture and interior design, and even eat and drink food and beverage consulting. So it's quite a collective, and we love collaborating with great people like Andy, Andrew, and hoping to work some with Will. We've got some projects that we're thinking about together. So excited to be here today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. I asked Herb to be here not only because they do design work, but they also get involved from a lot of strategic perspective with a lot of these kind of developments, that are much larger and need guidance from folks who kind of know what they're doing. So Herb is humble, but he's actually a lot smarter than just your typical architect. Which brings us to Will. Will, welcome aboard. Thanks for coming on today. Tell us a little about you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, first of all. I have been plugging away at food halls for about 6 years now. We opened our first food hall in New Orleans in 2014. And since then have built 6 more. So it's a labor of love, learned a ton of lessons. And just having a good time. It's been a wild ride, especially in the last 8 months. I think like it has been for everybody, but digging in and finding great concepts and getting to eat a lot.
Will, are you a restaurant lifer like we are, or what's your background?
Yeah, I grew up in the restaurant business. My family, my dad is a reformed lawyer and really a pizza mechanic. So I grew up in restaurants my entire life, paid my way through college twice, doing, stuff in restaurants. And then when I got out, it's just the industry. I actually got out. I spent several years in other shared space businesses. So I started and sold a co-working operation. And I did some other shared space businesses. And then when the opportunity came about in New Orleans to do the St. Roch market, it was, kind of similar. And I was really excited to get back into restaurants. So, yeah, that's where I come from.
Awesome. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Your shared space background was, as you just said. I was wondering when you said that, how does that relate to your experience now? I mean, I'm sure that'll come up. A couple of things we want to talk about today. We try to focus the attention. We make sure that we're getting something away from this, so I don't talk too much. First of all, I've gotten a whole lot of questions from folks, developers that we're working with, and others that are just kind of asking me about what's going on in food hall space right now. Obviously, it's a difficult period of time, and as folks are emerging from that. And then the different markets' ability to pivot and adapt has been very different from place to place based on all kinds of factors. So we're going to talk a little bit that as well. And then obviously the toll of the last 8 months is obviously coming into play. Obviously for all of us, and probably more importantly, all the operators that operate within a food hall are generally very small businesses, and it's been a very difficult time for the entire restaurant industry, but obviously affects folks that are very vulnerable in places like a food hall, perhaps more than I think the public realizes. And then the third part of today is really talking about projects that we all have or are considering we were maybe underway on, prior to all this starting, and then what's evolved thought process wise over the last 8 months. And what does that mean for projects that are currently in the works or in the planning? I've certainly been asked to kind of go back and revisit a lot of those, and we're going to talk a little bit about, what my thoughts are on how to react to that and everybody else's. But as I said, maybe a good place to start is kind of what's happening right now in food hall world and traffic counts and all that. I would start by just saying I did some calls over the last couple of weeks to prepare for this. I've kind of kept in touch with a lot of operators that I know. And yesterday I had a lot of people send me pictures of, in fact, it was a little depressing, because a lot of these shared spaces are in places where there's tons of office space. As we all know, a lot of food halls are built in urban areas where there's a lot of office space. And in some cases, the food halls rely on, 80% of their business relies on that office space that's now, unfortunately, still very, occupied, very small percent. So I got a lot of pictures of empty projects yesterday, which was sad. And God love them. They're still, trying to make it happen. But Will, what have you been experiencing at your properties, and how does that feel right now?
Yeah. So we have all 6 of our spots open. I think everybody in the industry has experienced some attrition. I think that's natural. Food halls largely pre-COVID were short-term lease environments, right? So basically, between now and middle of next year, almost everybody that operates in a food hall will get an opportunity to renew or not renew. And I think so. It's one of the great things about the industry is going to be a short-term challenge for the industry. But I'm in Houston today at our store here, and I visited several of the other food halls around town last night, and it's like you say, the ones that are where they were relying on core office is, they're getting killed. And this one that I'm in is ours in Rice Village, and it's surrounded by residential, and it's doing a little bit better. And so what we're seeing is across our portfolio, if it relies on office, we only have 2 that are in sort of proximity to office, and the balance are in residential neighborhoods. And there's a clear distinction. So I think that's a lot of what we're seeing is people kind of, you got to hang on right now. We made the decision really early on to waive all of the base fees associated with, these projects in order to give our guys the softest, landing possible. And I think to a large extent that's helped. I talked to other food hall operators, and most people are seeing, somewhere right around 50, sometimes 60% attrition on their projects. And I think that's just going to be normal for a while. We're also signing deals though. And so there is a contrarian set of folks out there that are like, dude, I can get a deal of a lifetime right now, and that's true. I mean, we're signing people up on the normal deals that we do, but we're waiving all the base fees to give them, an opportunity to get off the ground. So while you see attrition, you also see a smart set of food professionals, getting ready to really get out there and conquer stuff. So, I'm excited to meet those entrepreneurs as well.
Yeah. Andy, what I think about, I'm sorry to jump in here, what I think about and Will's greatest challenge, or any operator's greatest challenge at that level, and even his clients, his tenants, is what's the purpose of the food hall? No matter whether they're in a good spot, they're well planned, whatever it might be, it's to bring community together. I mean, it's really, it's a hub spot for activity and environment, be it in the neighborhood or be it in the office environment. And the challenge is today twofold. One, we're being told, don't go where community comes together. Don't, at least in the short term. It was great pre-March 12th or whatever it was, because it was an energizer for environments and development. But today, so that's the first part. Everybody's being told, don't go there. So huge uphill battle for Will. And then secondly, the regulations aren't universal across our country, not to get political or anything, but it's just, they're not. So I was in Denver recently at Dairy Block. It's pretty active, you know? But then again, I go down to LA to Central Market and it's desolate. You know, there's no travel tourism coming into the city, which activates that spot a lot, you know, and there's no office community. Anyway, I could go on, but the purpose of the food hall has been thrown a blanket on top of that and suffocated because of what we're going through over the last 8 months. I don't know, Will, if you agree, but I think that's just natural.
I do. You read these articles, you know, like JLL just put one out saying, hey, look, food halls are going to be a great landing spot for people. And I absolutely agree. The timing, on the other hand, is the big question. Is like, when are food halls going to be a great landing spot? Because I think, you know, to Herb's point, your food halls, you know, they're known, or when you think of it, you think of that image of going to like fill a table with food from all different, you know, places, and the place is jam packed with people. So while they're big, and yes, we can spread out, the immediate consumer sort of mindset around a food hall is that there's going to be a bunch of people there when I go. And that, you know, to y'all's point, if there's not a bunch of people there, something must be wrong. You know what I mean? And so that's, you know, that's going to be a awkward 12 to 18 months for the food hall set, for sure.
Definitely. I mean, what you're saying about the vibrancy aspect is what makes it so much fun to be there. You know, I mean, being around other people want to be where other people are. You know, a restaurateur I worked for at one point explained that to me quite well, is that you want to see and be seen, and you know, all those things. That's what makes a food hall fun to be at, is the tight quarters and the little, you know, there isn't a lot of seating around necessarily, and it might not be quite so you know, so spacious, you know, which is why I thought it was really funny in many of the articles I read about how food halls were so well positioned to have all this extra space. Nope, I don't know what food hall you've ever been to, but I mean, there might be space in there now because there's no one there, you know, and I want to get back to that. But before we get on with that, Andrew, what have you seen in your neck of the woods? You guys are both in Southern California, but Andrew's more in the city.
Yeah, I'm in Los Angeles, specifically in Hollywood, and you know, there's not a lot open. What we're seeing with restaurants is taking advantage of outdoor space, and every imaginable nook and cranny, people are setting up tables, and the city seems to be allowing it. Some of my friends who are operators have been pleasantly surprised at how compliant the city is with allowing them to put tables on sidewalks. And adjacent landlords, they have a sidewalk, they have a boutique and a sidewalk, and they're, you know, it's individual based on the person, but they're finding cooperation because, you know, it's revenue for everybody. And so people are looking for revenue. There's, in terms of, you know, I haven't been to Central Market in a while. The last time I was there, no one else was. And then, you know, there's a small food hall on the promenade in Santa Monica with four or five units. And I thought maybe because it was small that it would feel more full, but it really doesn't. So I don't have a ton to offer other than I don't see a lot of people around. But we're a pretty closed down city in many ways. Everything has to be outdoors. So I don't know, Will, do you see, and I'm sure it's individual based on the location, but are there opportunities to bring some of the people sitting and eating outdoors at food halls?
Yeah, I mean, anybody that has a patio right now is doing better than anybody, I think, nationwide without a patio. To me, it's been really interesting to see, for example, our Chicago project. One thing that happened at the beginning of COVID is all the standards kind of flew out the window because, you have to take every single location and look at it through the eyes of how that city is working. So like Miami, it's like COVID never happened. But Chicago is like extremely COVID sensitive. And so it depends. There is definitely one thing that I've noticed along this sort of path is each city has a vibe about how it's kind of dealing with COVID. And that becomes crucially important to how you operate. Our Chicago location has a giant patio with a beer garden that we built. It's like a brutalist German beer garden thing that we did. It was super fun. And it has done well throughout patio season all summer long because people feel comfortable. And so instead of operating a food hall up there, what we did is we took each of the individual vendors and we let them pop up for a week at a time on the patio, grilling outside or doing, some sort of variant of their normal concept, and then paired it with a beer garden. So at least if they weren't going to have substantial retail volume to do a daily operation, they could come in, make the money and keep their labor, tight with their sales, and then do that once a month. And that worked out, but again, custom plan for a location. So everything is custom right now. And that's, I think, the big challenge for anybody, if you're a multi-unit or multi-state operator, is that it's really, you have to look at everything specifically. And so I think that's kind of what's going to separate the men from the boys, I think, for the rest of the year, is the ability to manage the incredible amount of communication that's required in every project for the next, 6 to 12 months. I wish we had a little bit more of a succinct and well adhered to national plan, because it's such a challenge, so.
Yeah. And to that point that Andrew made was great. If we veer a little bit off food halls for a minute and think about just restaurant touring, we put out a toolkit. Street Sense developed this whole toolkit, and we thought about the COVID, and you smartly separate by 6 feet and so forth. And we did these modelings, and we recognized, well, it doesn't pencil. Even if they allowed you to open your dining room and you could, separate people, it just literally didn't make sense against the labor model and what was happening. So those unique and special ideas that Will is talking about, and being able to be specific. But you think about it, the thousands of locations, or let's just take food halls, the hundreds that have opened up already that have outdoor areas that you can take advantage of, but probably can't seat enough people. And then you have 6 to 10 or 12 different vendors that you're trying to, again, Will came up with a solution, but it's just very challenging over the last 8 months. And then think about Chicago, when your weather hits and you got to shut that place down, you're done. Boston might be great, except for the summer, but Chicago's not. So
what a ride. Yeah. Fortunately, and at the same time, 2020 has been just a heck of a year. At the same time, we've been battered with hurricanes on the Gulf Coast. Most of our properties are down here. So it's like, it's just every day is a new surprise, But I think that's also speaks to the tenaciousness of food and beverage entrepreneurs. Some of these guys are just plowing ahead, and, despite all odds, despite all, anything that might happen. And, you really have to look at that and admire, just the grit to get all that done.
Tenaciousness. Yeah. The tenaciousness, as you were just saying, one of the guys I know is just all over the place doing stuff. Of course, they had a food truck as well before. They've kind of fired that back up a little bit, but they immediately pivoted to doing basically home chef meals, where they'll go prepare something at someone's house. He's all over, doing all kinds of stuff, and was able to utilize the brand that he had before they came into the food hall, but then started off-site as well, just doing all kinds of stuff. Which is kind of, we were talking about the pivoting, the ability to pivot. Andrew was asking about being outdoors. Southern California is, almost the only place in America anyway, where that's going to work for any extended period of time. Living in the South, of course, it's still hot here. Many days. It's just the last couple of weeks. We've had a couple of cool nights, but New Orleans is probably still hot. People don't really want to sit outside so much. They're a little bit more conditioned to it. People are more used to, we're Southerners are more used to sitting outside sweating. But it's been, almost impossible. We went dining out on the streets, closing down streets, of course, has been great in a number of communities. That certainly helped. the general public feels, I don't think anyway, understands how those numbers really don't pencil, as Herb was pointing out. Even with some outdoor seating, the amount of room it takes and the difficulty is just very difficult. I read another funny article the other day. I had to look it back up again because they were talking about how restaurants needed to take their unused space out of the dining room and turn it into prep and turn the parking lot into the kitchen. And it's like, wow, this is written by somebody who literally has no idea, what that means and how completely impossible, that scenario really is.
And illegal.
Yeah, and completely illegal, and just even if it wasn't, just all kinds of mess, right? Trying to make something like that happen. I think food halls in general, have so many things that are difficult to pivot. I mean, a number of folks were able to start, selling some grocery goods in their stores and doing some other things. But again, with food halls being so urban place and not that much foot traffic. Before all this happened, and Will, I know you've done a number of these that are kind of not in urban centers. We were looking at trying to kind of come up with models that really worked in, what I call semi-urban or, suburban markets. What size food hall makes sense? How does the economics work to get to, a model, that would actually work? So over the last several months, we've kept working on that and came up with some outdoor versions that are kind of like a large patio surrounded by a few different operations, and kind of kept working on that. Not long, I guess it was a couple of years ago, met a developer from Australia who was telling me a lot about their Laneways concept that they do in Australia. And I had never heard of a laneway. And, simply put, it's just a bunch of restaurants and bars and stuff in a little tiny lane, and like in an alleyway, in Australia. And we were talking about, establishing or putting in kind of a food hall model into that environment, more outdoor space mixed with indoor. I'm very intrigued by that, and think that, there's somehow a model there that might work to take the vibrancy that we all love about a food hall and kind of mix it, in a more residential area.
We've always focused on residential food halls, and maybe just, I guess, when other people zig, we decided to zag. But we found a lot of success in it, and I think if you see the amount of people that are buying like suburban homes right now, people want to be outdoors. General reconnection to nature, all of these things. I think it's a huge opportunity. So one of the things that we've been working on for about a year now, is we've taken the data that we have in our own food halls, and we've amassed data of locations that people ask us to build food halls in. And we've taken all that data and regressed it against public data sets. Like, for example, in Texas, sales taxes on beverage selling institutions are public. So it's a hop, skip, and a jump to what their sales volumes are, right? And if you take that sales volume and you plot it on a map, and you regress it against criteria, like data that's out there, resident counts, hotel counts, all these things that you can get basically out of Esri databases, its patterns start to emerge. And so one of the things that we realized is that we were able to isolate it to 4 or 5 different factors that we can statistically prove generate sales at a food hall. It doesn't tell you 100% of the story, but we were able to prove about 30 to 35% of the story. And one of the biggest factor overall was household count. So, that's something. I think the downtown food halls have to fundamentally be engineered differently in order to work. It's throughput. Everybody's coming downstairs from their office building between 11 and 1. They all got to get food, and they got to get back upstairs. And that's the reason I think you see a lot of these hyper engineered food halls in that particular setting. But there's definitely a space for your hangout food hall. I mean, if you look at Ponce in Atlanta, or you look at, these larger locations that focus on outdoor area, I think that it's not new. The Ponce was successful long before COVID. And so I think you can take some we can all take some lessons from that as we move forward in designing food halls for sure.
Hey, Will, that popped a question up in my head, if you don't mind, Andy. I've always thought about that. When you go out in the residential community and you think about, I'm a Washington, D.C. guy, even though I'm living in LA. So let's use Washington, D.C. example. You think about Union Market down in the heart of the city, Eden's been really successful with that market. But then you think about Rockville or Gaithersburg, Maryland, which is a suburb. So you've got the density of homes, you've got your consumer base there, these 5 tick marks you want to make. But how do you get your operators to go to jump the shark? I always think about the authenticity of a food hall, has the best taqueria in town, has the best coffee and bakery. Baked and Wired may never put a place in Gaithersburg. They would jump the shark, to put a place in. So give us a little insight on how you get an operator to go out into, a suburban environment, or you don't. But I'm just curious.
That is the $64 question, isn't it? I mean, we have focused on, it definitely plays into our sort. Like, we got asked to do a food hall at Seaside, or, Seagrove over there. And I'm like, well, how would I, are there enough food operators over there, that would do it? And so I think there's definitely like some sort of balance, but then maybe you look at, a good successful example is the Marietta Food Hall, right? And that one's apparently doing quite well. There's one in Charlotte that's opened up that's doing quite well. That's definitely similar. And so it's outskirts of Charlotte, and you're seeing some success there. So I think there's definitely a happy medium. I haven't put my finger on it just yet, but I'm working on it.
Cool.
Yeah, I think I think some of that is as we look at what's going to happen in the future, and the ability to pivot and be able to take advantage of other business opportunities that maybe food halls haven't so far, because the concentration was on urban, or at least setting them up as urban even when they weren't in. It sounds like, Will, you've been kind of not doing that already, which is very smart. The ability to do off-premise sales is obviously continued to grow. The convenience factor, convenience has been a factor and has been one of the leading factors in food for a long time. And COVID kind of kicked everybody's ass to remind them, hey, you need to be very convenient to do business with. Can't just expect folks to walk in. So those projects where people can take advantage of that. As you look to new projects, and this is both for Herb and Will, are you trying to figure out how to integrate more off-premise sales, whether it's delivery or drive-thrus or whatever? Let either one of you answer that.
Oh, go ahead. Well, it's a design challenge, but let's talk operations first. I'll talk happy to.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, well, from a design perspective, I will tell you that's a big 180 degree, not 180, but 90 degree shift for us, Andy, in the sense that how do we accommodate, that third customer, if you will. I mean, these again were originally designed, if I understood the question correctly, as a purpose for community to come together, not to go get food and take it away. Unless in the office environment, we understand that people are going to come in, grab it, whatever, and take it. But still about stretching the day parts. You can grab that morning coffee and sit there. You can grab that afternoon late, coffee or even drink, extending the day part, not that midday rush. So now it's about, how do you turn those sales into offsite sales? And I just tell you, design did not take that into consideration the first many years of designing food halls. So it is a shift in paradigm. So
totally. So back in I want to say April or May, a bunch of the other guys in the food hall business put together a Zoom call, and we're like, what have you guys figured out? And everybody's question was what's going to happen with online? Can we get them on online sales? Will this work? And and so we get through about 30 or 45 minutes of the call, and somebody stops and just says, okay, what is everybody's pre-COVID online ordering percentage? And it was 2%, 3%, 4%. There was nobody that was 15%. And so Herb's absolutely right. This was not a thing. People didn't plan for food halls, because a food hall is a place you go to have a good time, or if it's under an office building, to get a quick lunch. But but generally speaking, it wasn't in the cards. Now, the second side of that, which I think was clear in Andy's article that he wrote, which I thought was almost a treasure map for anybody wanting to be in the food hall business. But the second point that is naturally difficult is that the food halls are a collection of individual business owners. So it's not that the food hall can put everybody online. It's the food hall's ability to get the individual business owners to all get online. And of course, the consumer wants them to all use the same online platform. So now you got an extra wrinkle. It's like herding cats. But we've had our own measured success, not without a lot of follow-up and work. And we're finally getting all of our halls on Chow Now. And we selected Chow Now because of another cool feature that they're doing. Not only did it integrate with our existing POS platform and stuff, which is, you saw this like renaissance of online ordering technology come out in the months post-COVID. But I think the real magic is that some of these platforms are allowing the underlying business operators to pass along the delivery fees back to the end consumer. So in the case of Chow Now, they did something that I was really impressed with. So they partnered up with DoorDash, and DoorDash charges its fees to the underlying operator. But Chow Now allows you to essentially take that fee and put it back on as a delivery fee to the customer. So the underlying business owner doesn't have the double-sided hit. And I think that was really creative. And by basically finding that win-win for the underlying operators, we were able to say, hey, look, this isn't just me being a bee in your bonnet trying to say, do this, do this, do this. This is why it makes sense for you to do it. And that's when we started to see some success with it. So, but you have to, everything is like that. You got to find the sort of the win-win-win for everybody and then plug away at it. Because ultimately, Herb's right. Wasn't in the design. We don't have drive-through windows.
Right. Yeah.
And I've actually been trying to figure out how to do that. So I was challenged, and this will sound crazy, but we had started working on kind of a large multi-use property that was pretty huge, and they have a whole block that they were going to devote to some food service. So they said, well, hey, we were thinking about doing a food hall here. What would you do? What's different now? So we really started to think about the site differently. Could we somehow put a drive-through in there, as crazy as that sounds, and came up with something that may work. Who knows? It's paper stage right now, but we're trying to figure that out. I had worked on a smaller version and showed it to Andrew a few months ago, which was for a smaller site. It was kind of a residential community where there's large apartment buildings and across the street from a giant office complex that's thankfully still there, but where we did basically a giant patio with a couple of vendors around it and put a drive-through in it and situate it so there's only 3 vendors in it, so we could put all 3 vendors to the same drive-through. So I started to take that concept to a larger project where we actually built kind of as part of the entire facility, almost like it reminded me of where I grew up. I grew up in the Midwest. We actually had drive-through beer places back then, where you actually drove your car into a thing, and you could and they brought it in your car, and people were like, oh wow, they used to do that. Yep, and it kind of worked, So we started to play around with that idea, which goes back to the point of being in more suburban areas, semi-urban, not being relied on, which no matter what you're thinking, as you said, Will, over the next many months, it's definitely not going to change. And I don't really, it would be hard to imagine people going back to 100% occupancy at their office space now that they've realized that they don't have to, and it still works to have your employees not be there. Folks like us who have worked remotely for many years already knew that, but there was certainly a lot of holdouts. And it's hard to imagine a bustling downtown area getting that same traffic count that it had. And the numbers already were just a significant challenge. The amount of people that it took to get into a food hall in those environments just made the economics very difficult. So it makes me wonder, more pressure on how to develop, a food hall-ish multi-concept model that works, in a more suburban or semi-urban environment.
I'm curious about this idea that, and Herb, you brought it up, some of the urban operators don't want to go to the suburban locations, and I don't know, as an entrepreneur, I want to go where people are buying stuff, right? And if my urban location is pretty quiet or a ghost town, why don't I want to go out? And is it, just simply put, is it just being snobs, or do they think that the diner isn't as sophisticated, or they don't want as many kids running around, or, I don't know. I mean, we read every day about urban flight where I live, and more people are moving out of LA than are moving in for the first time in a very long time. And frankly, most of LA is a pretty suburban place anyway, with some rare exceptions. So I don't know. I kind of grimace when I hear something like that, because I think, gosh, there are a lot of talented chefs that are missing an opportunity, and why the hell not go to some bedroom community?
Yeah, I will color my comment by saying mine was really pre this pandemic, scenario. I think you're right. I think there are lots of chefs that are going to be opportunistic, but they're artists, and I don't want to call it ego, but I want to call it, just being true to themselves and saying, hey, this is where I grew up. This is the dirt and grime that I grew up with, and this is the market that I want to be in. And I could be wrong, but in the entrepreneurs and the chefs that I deal with, and the artists, they're like, hey, that's for Ruby Tuesdays. That mind shift might change. Nothing against Ruby Tuesdays, even though they just filed chapter. They had great chicken fingers. But I don't want to use it. I don't know a big chef name, but I don't see this person who grew up in and around Brooklyn is going to all of a sudden go out to White Plains somewhere. And I'm speaking in territory. But it was pre-COVID also.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's parts of that make sense to me, and parts of me that are just like, stop it, don't be a fool,
Yeah, people are going to go where people want them to be, right? So if that's what I think. I mean, I think you're right, Andrew. I think that talented folks see an opportunity, they'll go there, and if there's a model that works, you can place them in a location that the model works for them, that they're profitable, the landlord can be profitable, and the developer, that it all makes sense. Why not? And why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Well, one more question on this subject to Will, and it sounds like your portfolio is pretty balanced with some urban and suburban, and maybe even places in between, sort of in the halfway mark. Do you see a difference in the kind of food, the adventurous nature of the food, et cetera, in these different urban versus suburban? I think sometimes people think, oh, well, a food hall is in the city, a food court is in the suburbs. And, a lot of us grew up thinking food courts were not even Ruby Tuesdays, but, lemonade stands with hot dogs on a stick and stuff like that. So is there a difference in food is my short question.
What we found is like it's really recognizable dishes. It's not that they need to be less or more, there needs to be less or more artistry with them. For example, the highest grossing food hall I have right now is in Jackson, Mississippi. It's not actually in Jackson, Mississippi. It's like, it's north of Jackson in a suburb. And it's, a project we did with for some friends. Otherwise, I don't know that we ever would have gone. But it's doing amazingly well. It's, you can drive up to it. It has outdoor seating. It's got big green in front of it. It has all of the things that the shopper wants these days, and it's killing it. So, however, the Jackson customer is not really looking for Uyghur food, right? It's a little more pedestrian. What we're seeing is like Mediterranean concept, a solid deli, right? Stuff that's like, in the fairway, but like make the dishes good. Everybody gets, a Greek salad. How can you make the Greek salad like the best Greek salad? And so I think what we're finding is that you really have to put your finger on that approachability button in the burbs. But if you can do that and make, an absolute like dynamite doner kebab, like you're going to do great. So, I think the downtown consumers that we've seen are a little bit more aggressive in their willingness to try weird stuff, which is fun for us as like food people, right? But still, like we did a Corralin concept in Chicago. It got a James Beard nomination. Like what? But you know, they couldn't convince John Q. Public to come in and always eat it as easily as something else. So, you know, I mean, I think a great food hall actually balances those two. You have the Corralin concept and tacos, you know what I mean? And you try to like kind of cover both bases so that you can do you can have both the functional product, but there's also some art involved. In fact, we do a lot of this when we work with new entrepreneurs. We're like, here's everything we've learned about successful concepts, right? We've got 80 something chefs in our platform at any given time. We've generated pre-COVID, we've generated an 81% success rate, which is, you know, in an industry where it's, you know, the average is, most people would say 45 to 55% success rate. And we do that by like, how do you write a menu? And what we found is here's all these lessons that we've watched people learn, or we've learned the hard way over time. Now, how do you compile this into, you know, a recipe that will generate success in a particular environment of a food hall? But what we find is that most menus need to be 5 dishes long. The top selling item is always going to be the one that people understand. And the last item on the menu, the 7th dish, the 6th dish, needs to be like the magic, you know, the thing that says, aha, the thing that you give the customer who's already eaten with you twice that week to say, but check this out, you know. And if you could adhere to some of those simple formulas, you can do it. But what we find is that's just more important than burbs, right? Because there's a lot of, you know, you have this idea of like fear of missing out sometimes. And in food halls, you really have this thing about like plate envy, where like, you know, you walk in the room and you have 150 dishes. All of a sudden, it's just like way too many decisions to make. And so what we find is like the mac and cheese sells because people are like, well, I don't know if the Corralin thing is going to be good, but I know what macaroni and cheese is. And so, you know, it's that there's a balance there that has to be struck, and more so in the burbs.
So I have no idea what Corralin is. And I'll bet you. So I'm asking that because
I know what a Donner is, but I know what a Donner is because we had a Donner person on our show. Sorry, Andrew.
You do?
Yeah, I know what a Donner is because we had.
Oh, I know what a Donner is, but Corralin.
Yeah, I didn't know what that is either.
Okay, Will, you're up.
It's Indian vacation food. It's beach food in Western India. I didn't know what it was either. And then I met this woman who, you know, was from there and living in Chicago. And, you know, just cooked amazing stuff. They're known specifically for a home cooked dish called egg curry, which is basically a curry with a soft boiled egg in it, which is an alarmingly good combination that I didn't know about.
That's exciting. I'd make a trip to Chicago. Southwestern Indian beach food.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
I have a question, Will, about that. You're starting to talk about how you kind of share your info. How engaged do you get with your operators with regard to their menu and making sure they can execute? And, you know, do you get into their further planning, you know, kind of menu evolution and helping them, you know, continue to evolve?
It's again, it's a balance. There's no right formula. I try to get involved as much as people want me to be involved, but you know, we're doing this, you know, so that people can have creative freedom over a menu. I mean, that's why you lower the barriers to entry. That's why. So like one thing that we say in every meeting is, you know, look, like we stay out of your creative Kool-Aid. You know, like the whole point is for you to be able to play the jazz. That being said, here's some tips that we've learned, you know, we can prove with data over time about how to be more successful, because, you know, at the end of the day, they want to make money. Like, you know, so like, it's challenging because there's also the psychology around entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurs are headstrong people that are going to fling themselves at a problem and hopefully get it right. So like, a lot of times folks don't want to listen. So one of the things we learned a long time ago, which is a rule that our culinary director and I kind of repeat like a mantra all the time, is like, we want to have good food, but we absolutely must have nice people. I can teach people to cook, I can teach people stuff, but I can't teach people to be nice to each other. And so at the end of the day, the first and golden rule of building a food hall is that the people that you select, you have to select them for the individual and the attitude, and the food is second. You'll get the food right if they'll work on it, but you need coachable people that, like, want to figure it out. And I think a lot of the mistakes that you see, a lot of the pain you see in food hall operations is when people get that fundamental golden rule wrong.
It's very interesting. Andrew and I've been talking about that quite a bit, about how to engage operators and at what level, and kind of taking a more coaching approach to that. From my past in franchising a long time ago, getting people to do the right thing is about compelling them, not telling them how. Here's the right thing to do and why, and helping them to get there. So the same kind of thought about operations wise, how to make people understand what they're doing and make sure their processes are correct. I'm curious, do you have any way to find out, or if a menu item is taking too long, or that it's not profitable for them? Are there ways in which you can figure that out and kind of help redirect them? Or do you kind of just, do you have like a regular quarterly meeting with them and say, how's it been going? What do you got? Analyze data, anything like that?
One of the things about the article that you wrote that really hit home for me, and I don't think anybody else that I've seen, I read all the stuff about food halls that gets printed pretty much. But the one point that was in your article that I don't think anybody else has touched on yet is the aspect of leadership, right? Because people don't understand that being a leader in a food hall is, by the way, probably the single toughest struggle we have, is to find great leaders at each of the individual properties, because it's not an easy leadership job. You have to be a consensus builder. You also have to enforce the rules. So you got to have this little flavor of authoritarianism in there. You can't, and the biggest mistake we see when we see new managers come in is they try to treat them like a restaurant, because that's what they know. And everybody reports to me, and I can establish these rules and you will follow them. But that's not how it works in a food hall, because they're independent business owners. They look at it like, it's their decision, and they're right. So that's where the consensus building comes in, And so it's this balance you have to strike, and it's incredibly difficult to teach people how to do it. But to answer your and I can't even claim that I've been able to. It is a conversation that we were having last night over dinner. It's like it's a very here and now thing. Because now, when in an environment like COVID, like, it's that much more important, because you're having to have that many more conversations on a daily basis. Why is my business not working? Why are people not coming through the door? Is it me? Is it them? Is it us? Or what? And so that shoulder to cry on and the empathetic nature is another characteristic that you have to have. And so it really requires a talented individual. And the present, puzzle that I'm trying to solve is how I teach people to do that in a consistent basis. It's quite difficult. But to answer the question directly, the one thing that we have found success with is we've got a bunch of coffee shops, right? So what I can do is show people the menu items that are selling from one coffee shop in Chicago to another one in Miami. And while, hey, look, there are differences between these markets. Look, now the power really comes in when you have 5 coffee shops, right? Because now I can say, look, matcha lattes, it's real. Like, get on this, or whatever. And I can show people data, obviously, without names and stuff, fully protected, but say, hey, look, this is a dish you should think about. And I don't take it from me. Look at this stuff. The more that you can introduce the idea of objectivism into it, because what always happens is oh, you want me to do this, the subjective pushback, And so I think that's where we found luck, is when we have, 5 delis or 5 Italian operators, and we can look at dishes that are trending that the market wants and say, look, you need a boost here. Let's get something on your menu that we can show you repeatedly sells in other locations.
So it sounds like, I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is great to listen to, because it sounds like you really do get pretty granular with your operators, certainly with the data that's coming in from all of your sites. And so you get pretty in detail with folks and coaching them.
yeah, but not without skinning our knees. Like you know, all of these lessons are, you know, things that we've learned. Like it's been a challenge at scale to be able to find the time and the focus, right? And so that's why I've got to teach other people to do it. And so it didn't all come at once. Like it's a lot of long plugging away and making mistakes, to be quite frank. I mean, you know.
It is.
Andy, I've been thinking about something I'm trying to get out of my head and trying to bring back into the conversation. I don't know how to link it to what Will was just sharing, but I wanted to widen the lens back to about 20 minutes ago, where we were talking about drive-through and the consumer, and, you know, and how the design and the operations of food halls, I think, are changing. And I think when we think about lots of things in COVID, not positive, but it's accelerated things that we were going to have to pay attention to anyway. And I think in any culinary environment, the consumer is evolving, and the Gen Z and the Gen Y, whatever, and how they do things. Yes, they want to come together communally, but they also want their options to take things away and be together aloneness. And where I guess I'm trying to widen that lens to say, all of a sudden, we've got so many more customers to reward. It used to be, when you think about the old traditional food culinary collection, you come, you order at some place, you take your food, you eat it there on premises, and you enjoy community, you know? Now you've got somebody coming, ordering, and doing that. You got somebody coming, ordering at the counter and taking it away. Now you've got somebody calling ahead or webbing ahead. How do you reward that person? How do you separate that person out? And then you got a fourth person. You've got a Grubhub or an Uber Eats person who's not even the consumer, the end consumer, coming and grabbing the food. So we as designers, Will as operators, Andrew as as the chef, culinary expert, have to figure out how to work. How's Andrew going to put his beautiful dish in a paper container to be taken away? So there's a lot of things that have been accelerated by this pandemic that needed to happen anyway. I was trying to somehow tie that into, Will, what you were just saying, but you have to, again, elevate your level of mentorship to your community there, that all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And the business model's changed. When you used to have 3% offsite sales or whatever, it's going to go to 40%. It's just reality. That's what's going to change, So anyway, something I had to get out of my head.
No, I agree. I agree with you. So one of my partners is Thai, and I grew up. He's my dad's age, and I grew up going to his restaurants, like in the 90s, and so I'm sitting down with him. He's like, I was like, how are you getting through this? He was like, I'm killing it. And I said, well, how is it different? How is what you're doing different than what we're doing? And the consumer, he had a to-go business beforehand, in the consumer mind. Like if you run Chinese restaurants, you're doing great right now, because the consumer thinks of Chinese and delivery and puts them together. Pizza restaurants, awesome, right? But the problem is that, if you're not in one of these industries that was known, or verticals that is known for delivery, like you're reinventing the wheel. And to Herb's point, you're reinventing it like 4 or 5 ways, right? Because you got the call ahead. You need totally different software for that. Like, you got to get all the hours straight. It's wild. It's like, it's just wild, the amount of challenges that you have to deal with right now. And it's crazy. And I don't, it's really going to change the way, the amount of operators there are. I also think it'll change the skill level of the operators. Those that make it through are going to be some real savvy folks,
Yeah, that's a really good point. You both just said a mouthful, so there's a lot to dig into all of that. But yeah, the folks that are emerging are really investing in that technology that, Will, you were just talking about, and just kind of the mind space to have a plan for all those. A smart person recently told me, and I've always believed in this, is that every one of those things that you were talking about, Herb, is view that customer journey from each individual channel completely separately. It's basically like a different business, when you, in your head anyway, to separate it, to make sure that every aspect of that customer journey is accounted for. I go through this with some people on a fairly regular basis, and it helps me anyway to think of it very chronologically. So when you talk about every one of those, paths of dealing with a potential guest, think about the whole thing on a chronological. I actually get as dumb as writing out every little thing and say, okay, well, what aspect of that, can we help, and it also helps me to think about every single pain point of every one of those. What are all the things that you hate about every one of those and you wish you could change, and figure out where those are in that timeline and kind of attack it, whether it's via operations, whatever the skill that you got to put at it, the competence, still needs to be there, and you got to, keep working, at those competence levels. Is obviously there. So that all that was just said. And the other thing that you mentioned, Will, that, I'm a big believer in pretty much every problem is a leadership problem, from some perspective, right? It's if obviously competence, you got to have the competence, the ability to know what you're doing. And then on top of that, the ability to lead folks is always going to be the hard thing. For people to do, and that's why there's there's so many self-help books in every bookstore. But as another smart person said, there's no help others books in the stores, right, which there should be. So, but yeah, so lots there. We're almost the end of our hour, I guess I want to just quickly hit on, we talked a little bit about kind of upcoming projects and what's being changed. And it sounds like, Will, you got a lot of stuff you guys are working on to try to implement in projects that you're working on. And Andrew and I are doing the same things with trying to integrate, design aspects and operational aspects from the start. One of the things that we were just talking about is kind of that analytics piece of it. Chain restaurants are big into analytics, obviously, because they have the funds and kind of the competence to get into that. And it seems to me that there's a big opportunity for that. And as technology, if you're able to go on everybody on the same platform, having really smart analytics people to be able to look at all that data and help guide strategies, can be part of how to evolve, what happens on premise. One of the things I've been thinking about lately anyway.
Yeah.
So other than that, we're about at the end of our time. Any other kind of closing thoughts?
I'll just share. I'm a great optimist. I think great things will come of this. But I also think the greatest thing, to your last point, Andy, that I can do as a owner and designer and brand, developer and so forth is tell every person to really think hard before you enter into this venture. I think there's a lot more people coming to me that I tell you shouldn't do this than I tell you should do this. Do you have the right operations in place? Do you have the right, space? Do you have the right consumer coming there? Even can't forget about pandemic, but will you evolve out of this successfully? And I will tell you, I tell 9 of them no and 1 of them yes. I mean, I'm telling people a lot more. I'll forever say this. I said this 5 years ago when the trend started. It is not the perfect solution for empty space. It just isn't. And be smart about it. So anyway, that's the advice I'm giving more often than not today in developing loans. Turning down work, really. So that's been my position lately. Be careful, when you think about this.
Very good advice. I often am using the euphemism of, hey, you'd be faster just to put your money in a big pile and set it on fire instead.
Yeah.
So tell that to a lot of restaurant people.
For the last 4 years, the solution to every real estate problem is to put a food hall in it. Yeah. And I think for the next 4 years, it's going to be where should the food hall go?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think I think a lot of people will learn some lessons. The one of the things that I also think is important is thinking about the solution, not just from the chef's perspective, because we can all sit behind our counter and solve a million problems, but thinking about them from the consumer side. And so I think there's a lot of people in the industry who want to solve the same problem with a restaurant. All right, get on all the best software so that you can do off-premise sales, and they want to apply that uniformly to the food hall as well. One thing that we're trying, and I can't say it's going to be successful, it literally launched this morning, but one of the things we sat back and we said, okay, cool, we're not going to be the best offsite off-premise delivery sort of food platform by far. So how do we change the game? And so what we're doing is we're taking the asset that we have, a bunch of chefs cooking a bunch of different stuff, right? And we're turning it into a home meal delivery platform that's a subscription model. So imagine if you could get that Kerala dish, a Uyghur dish, and the doner, right, on your doorstep every week, right? Not the same dish, that chef's selection for that 1 week. And imagine if you could then also pop it in the fridge and take it out when you're ready for it. So like a heat and eat platform. Ultimately, we have this endless supply of creativity. So what we're trying to do is take that and give it to the consumer in a different way. Kind of like a meal kit, except you don't chop the onions. Kind of like Uber Eats, except you're getting it on a subscription basis. And so what you're able to do is really connect with that chef and eat his or her food, and they can actually vary their dishes. So now you don't have the same like restrictions about how you design the perfect food hall menu. Now you can take the element of I'm Yvonne, and my heritage is Mexican, but I also cook a mean noodle dish, right? And so what we're doing is trying to refocus on the way the consumer is shopping and give them a delivery platform that ultimately works for the consumer who's staying at home a lot. And so what we did is we started to do fun add-ons. So we're adding on wine, we're adding on board games, activities. I got kids, they're at home, they have nothing to do. Tie-dye kits, and stuff like this. And so we've launched it this morning. It's called Parcel. And we're trying to figure out whether the consumer will buy it. Ultimately, like a more convenient way to eat it, to get the food hall experience at home. So.
That's really cool. That's one of the funnest new ideas I've heard lately. That's awesome. Good luck with that.
Yeah, I'll let you know if it works.
It sounds like it will. It's awesome. Well, awesome, guys. I've taken an hour of your time, and I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much. I hope everybody listening got something out of it. I'll put the show notes in so that everybody knows how to at least send you a message and ask you a question if you got any. So thanks so much, guys, and hope to see you all soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.